Chapter 2, Part 1. We're going to see Alice's adventures continue as she's just eaten a cake at the end of Chapter 1, and we're going to find out what happens. Chapter 2, The Pool of Tears. Curiouser and curiouser. Remember how we talked about curious before and curiosity? Well, this is the same thing. She's just extra curious, isn't she? Curious and curiouser, cried Alice. She was so much surprised that for the moment she quite forgot how to speak good English. Now I'm opening out like the largest telescope that ever was. Goodbye, feet. But when she looked down at her feet, they seemed to be almost out of sight. They were getting so far off. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and stockings for you now, dear. I'm sure I shan't be able. I shall be a great deal too far off to trouble myself about you. You must manage the best you can. But I must be kind to them, thought Alice, or perhaps they won't walk the way I want to go. Let me see. I'll give them a new pair of boots every Christmas. Have you ever sent your feet presents? Is that silly? And where did Alice think she would send the boots? And she was planning to herself how she would manage it. They must go by carrier, so she was going to have to send the boots by post office to get the boots to her feet because she had gotten so tall. She thought, and how funny it'll seem, sending presents to one's own feet. And how odd the directions will look. Alice's right foot, Esquire. Hearthrug near the fender, with Alice's love. Oh dear, what nonsense I'm talking. Just then her head struck against the roof of the hall. She was in fact now more than 9 feet high. 9 feet is super tall. It's actually 3 times, so way taller than I can reach. 3 of these sticks long, so we could go from here to here to here and have 9 feet. Super long, and she was that tall. How crazy was that? She at once took up the little golden key and hurried off to the garden door. Poor Alice. It was as much as she could do lying down on one side, to look through into the garden with one eye, but to get through was more hopeless than ever. She sat down and began to cry herself. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, said Alice. A great girl like you. She might well say this, to go on crying in this way? Stop this moment, I tell you. But she went on all the same, shedding gallons of tears until there was a large pool all around her, about 4 inches deep. So we'll get back out our trusty little measuring stick. 4 inches. She had a pool 4 inches this deep, all around her of her tears. Do you think you could cry enough that you would have a 4-inch pool? And it reached halfway down the hall. After a time, she heard a pattering of feet. Do you know what pattering means? Pattering is like scampering or running. She heard a little noise of feet in the distance. She quickly dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the white rabbit returning, very splendidly, dressed with a pair of white kid gloves. Now, Kid is a baby goat, so his gloves were made out of a baby goat skin in one hand and a large fan in the other. He came trotting along in a great hurry, muttering to himself as he came, Oh, the Duchess, oh, the Duchess. Do you know what a Duchess is? A Duchess is a part of the royal family. And since this story takes place in England, the same place where Around the World in 80 Days took place and the same place where Paddington, this was part of the royal family that they were used to knowing what was. Oh, won't she be a savage if I've kept her waiting? Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to help of anyone. So when the rabbit came near her, she began in a low, timid voice. If you please, sir. The rabbit started violently, dropping the white kid gloves in the fan. Was Alice being polite? She was, wasn't she? But the rabbit started violently, dropped the white kid gloves in the fan, and scurried away into the darkness as hard as he could go. I think the rabbit might have been being a little rude. Alice took up the fan and gloves, and as the hall was very hot, she kept fanning herself all the time. She went on talking. Dear, dear, how queer everything is today. Queer is one of those interesting words that we don't use in this way very often, and it means strange. So what kind of strange things had happened to Alice so far? She had eaten things, and she had drank things, and she had cried 4 inches of tears, and she got little bitty and great big, and now she'd found a rabbit who was wearing gloves and dropped a fan. So lots of strange things had happened to Alice. And yesterday, things were on just as usual. I wonder if I've been changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost think I can remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not the same, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's a great puzzle. And she began thinking over all the children she knew that were of the same age as herself, to see if she could have changed for any of them. I'm sure I'm not Ada, she said, for her hair goes in such long ringlets, and mine doesn't have ringlets at all. And I'm sure I can't be Mabel, for I know all sorts of things, and she knows very little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I, and oh, how dear, how puzzling this all is. I'll try to see if I know all the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is, oh dear, I shall never get to 20 at that rate. However, the multiplication table doesn't signify. So multiplication are math facts that we haven't learned about yet. But let's try geography now. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome. And Rome, no, that's all wrong, I'm certain. I must have been changed for Mabel. I'll try and say something I memorized. How doth the little? She crossed her hands in her lap as if she was saying her lessons to repeat it. But her voice sounded hoarse and strange, and the words did not come the same as they used to. How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spread his claws, and welcome little fishes with gently smiling jaws. Oh, I'm sure those are not the right words. Have you ever said things wrong when we're doing our recitations? I bet you have, I know you have. I make mistakes all the time and you guys have to tell me. And did you notice how Alice, when she recites, she's set with her legs crossed and with her hands folded on her lap? How do we recite when we get up and recite? Do we use a performance posture and put our hands to our side? Her eyes filled with tears again and she went on. I must be Mabel after all. And I shall have to go and live in that poky little house and have next to no toys to play with. And oh, ever so many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind about it. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here. I'll be of no use of putting their heads down and saying, come up again, dear. I shall only look up and say, who am I then? Tell me first. And then if I like being that person, I'll come up. If not, I'll stay down here till someone else. But oh dear, cried Alice with a sudden burst of tears. I do wish they would put their heads down. I'm so very tired of being all alone here. We're going to stop right there with chapter 2. What has happened so far to Alice? She's gotten bigger. And then she struggled with figuring out who she was. Things were so strange for her. And then she didn't know if she was really Alice or maybe one of her friends. And she couldn't remember what she was supposed to know. And she was getting lonely being down there. And so we're going to find out what else has happened to her in chapter 2, The Pool of Tears, when we start back on this book next week. So thank you for listening to our story, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye.